there's that theme, and everybody's nonplussed. This is the tribute to Barry Gray. Ladies and gentlemen, from the age of 4 years old, really from the age I was first conscious, that voice was always in my home every night. My father could see me now. I think he'd get up, probably walk around the block, and he's been gone for 22 years, because Barry Gray was my father's idol, and Barry Gray was the man my grandfather listened to night after night after night. And I was talking to Bob Grant 2 weeks ago, and I said, you know the great thing about Barry? Even if you're not interested in the specific subject he's addressing that night, even if you disagree with him, you want Barry Gray. You want the voice of Barry Gray keeping you company in that room, and that was his magic. It was beyond what he said, and what he said was grand, but it was the man's, that magnificent Titanic voice, bathing you in your own home, surrounding you in your own home, keeping you company, your companion in your own home. Barry Gray was your relative. He belonged in your home. That was his art. That was his magic. It was just a gift. People can go to broadcasting school, but they can never get the grace of God that enabled Barry Gray to be a champion, a legend of this business. Barry Gray invented talk radio. And so this is a difficult show for me and all of us here at WOR to conduct, but we do it out of a respect, a reverence, and a real love for the man we all admired our whole life, Barry Gray. I think we have Joan Hamburg on the line now. Is that right? Joan, are you there?
Jay, yes. And not only I was listening to you talk about how you grew up with Barry, but from my high school years and college years on, he too was a voice in all of our lives. My mother used to hide the radio in the bathroom because my father wanted to go to bed, and she would sneak in to listen to Barry Gray. So whenever any of the kids would come in or come home, we would hear that voice. It was sort of all part of our consciousness. When I was a young broadcaster at a station which has now become a religious station, it was one of the early big talk stations in New York. Barry Gray was the king and the leader. Bob Grant was there already. I came in. I had young kids at the time, and Barry Gray taught me so many things, Jay, as he's taught all of us. He taught me, number one, to really know what you're talking about, to not be afraid, and to care about each and every person out there the way he cared. Take the chance, know what you're doing, and care. He was a giant, and we all learned from him. I used to be scared. You know, when you start out in this business and that great big voice and all that power.
Titanic.
But it was an incredible experience for me. I spent my early years in this business learning from him. And over the years, our paths, of course, have crossed many times. We've traveled together as families. I know many members of his family. I've become a good friend of his wife and celebrated with them the joy of this baby. And I know the joy it brought to all of them. So this is a great loss for the whole broadcast community and for the community at large. But you and I both know that wherever Barry is tonight, that big voice is booming all over.
That's right. He is a part of my family. That was a nightly ritual for years and years. So help me, Joan, it was the first voice I learned to recognize every night 11. And you know, speaking about that station, before they went talk, he was the only talk show. It was the biggest rock and roll station in town, and yet they stopped the rock and roll
for him.
For him.
It's true. And he taught so many of us how to do it. You know, how to really take issues that you care about. No question that he mentored more people in this industry, and he made such a mark. Everyone, I think, no matter who they are, knows who Barry Gray is. What I always marveled at is that as Barry grew older, his mind grew sharper and sharper. He never, ever lost sight.
And one other tribute, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Joan. He was a gentleman. Through and through and through in the classic tradition. Barry set an example on the air and off. Joan, I appreciate your coming tonight on
I thank you,
WOR.
Jay. We're going to miss him a lot, and we're all going to carry on knowing that he's watching each and every one of us.
We better be on our best behavior.
Take care.
Okay, thank you. That's
Bye.
Joan Hamburg, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jay Diamond, a tribute to Barry Gray on WOR Radio 710.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Grant. When I first came to New York back in 1970 to join the radio station WMCA. It really wasn't called WMCA out on the coast when we talked about the radio station. I talked about going to the radio station where Barry Gray broadcast. And friends of mine would say to me, "Hey, Bob, I understand you're going to New York. You're going to work on the Barry Gray station." Barry indeed was a legend. Whenever people talked about controversy on talk radio, whenever people talked about celebrity interviews, whenever people talked about taking a stand, no matter how unpopular that stand may be, the name Barry Gray was certainly to be heard. When I met Barry in September of 1970, I recall the warmth in which he greeted me, the genuine respect he had, not for me as a person because he didn't know me, but for the reputation I had gained out on the West Coast. And I considered it a great honor that he welcomed me to the radio station, and that he was only too happy to share with me any knowledge he had of the city, which, as you may know, was extensive. Barry was born in Los Angeles, but when he came to New York, he fell in love with it and never once really wanted to leave. This is where his profession was. This is where his work was. And above all, this is where his heart was. New York City. He loved everything about it. But most of all, I think he loved the people. The people whom he had interviewed, countless hundreds of people who felt it a great honor to be a guest on the Barry Gray Show. And all I can say is it was an honor to have known him, to have worked with him, and to have him call me a friend. And so, Barry Gray may be gone, but he leaves a legacy of great broadcasting and great times. Thank you.
All right, this is Jay Diamond on WOR. We continue with our salute to Barry Gray, and we say hello to State Senator, Deputy Minority Leader David Patterson. Hello, David.
Good evening, Jay.
David, you were a regular with Barry for a long, long time. I think that's where I first got to know you, and I could always feel the real respect that you had for each other.
You know, Jay, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my father, who had been a state senator before me, took me to an affair, and we ran into a man named Norman Frank, who was the head of the Police Benevolent Association, or it may have been John Cassis. It was one of the two. And they were laughing and joking together, and I couldn't understand this because there had been a bitter battle over the Civilian Complaint Review Board in 1966. And my father and Norman Frank had debated each other on the Barry Gray Show, and it was, they obviously had different points of view. They were having such a good time together, and I said to my father, "How do you know him?" He says, well, we became friends on the Barry Gray Show. And I think that's the real tribute that I would give to Barry, is that his radio program was really the mantle for political and social discussion around the city. People would come on, they would disagree, and I remember in one particular situation, I think it's the only time in my career when this happened to me, and oddly enough, it was the same week that I got married, I became a little acrimonious with one of the other guests on the Barry Gray Show over the Crown Heights issue.
Wouldn't have been the first time.
The next day, Barry spoke to me, and he said, "David, I'm not speaking to you as a talk show host, I'm speaking to you as a friend." He said, "There are a lot of people out there who would really respect you, but you've got to understand other people's feelings and other people's points of view." Well, I never forgot that. I mean, it was just a terrific thing to do for a friend, which was how I considered Barry. And I guess I just have to tell you on a lighter note, the last time I spoke to him was on the program he did for his birthday. And just as a little joke, because he was always asking me, I let my son say happy birthday to him, so we could always say that 3 generations of Pattersons have been on the Barry Gray Show.
Well, I think the sage advice he gave to you is reflected in the wisdom that he espoused to so many people. And you know something? His presence was so grand. His presence was so big in the studio, you wouldn't dare oppose him. And so I think that led to the cultivation of a friendly environment in the studio.
My first two appearances on his show were actually in the studio. He hadn't fully converted to doing the telephone interviews, which is, the more standard practice now.
That's right.
And that presence had a lot, it kind of carried over.
Right. You're right. You know, David, that's so true, because his original classic format was a coffee clutch.
Exactly.
With people in the studio. And I mean, if he weren't there to settle everybody down, it could have really become raucous.
And, well, let me tell you, I could tell in his intonations when I was talking to him on the phone when he was about to have had about enough with me. And I remember one case, Assemblyman Joe Lenthal and I were debating, and he'd had about enough of the two of us, and I could feel that stare coming through the phone lines, and I'm just going to miss him. And I don't know if this is not an interesting time in your life, because perhaps you'll be the beginning of a new tradition.
Well, if I can hold to the tradition and the gentle grace that he displayed on the air, then I will really be, fulfilling a very noble legacy. And David, I feel Barry's presence staring at us right now, because we're late for some spots. This is Jay Diamond on WOR, a tribute to Barry Gray.
A rare find happens only now and then. Your Honda dealer would like to emphasize the now part, because now there's a true rarity, the Accord Special Edition. It's got lots of additions, rich features that until now you might have thought were a little too rich. Now you can treat yourself to a power moonroof, AM/FM stereo with CD player, alloy wheels, a security system with remote entry. Now you can reward yourself with power windows and door locks, cruise control, air conditioning, automatic transmission, wood grain style trim, even a leather-wrapped steering wheel. And now you can congratulate yourself for getting all the things you so richly deserve at a great price. $20,795. That's just $20,795 for the Accord Special Edition. But remember, while this rare find is at your Honda dealer now, better move fast before now turns into then. MSRP excluding tax, license, registration, and options. Dealer prices may vary.
WOR, Radio 710, America's talk and information station, informs you about WOR contest rules. You must be 18 years or older. No purchase necessary. Prizes have no exchange value. Winners are responsible for taxes and agree to sign WOR documentation. Only one winner per household every 30 days. For complete rules for specific WOR contests, send a stamped self-addressed envelope to WOR Contest Rules, 1440 Broadway, New York, New York, 10018.
As we share holidays and happy times with friends and loved ones, the joys of the celebration fill us with hope, while memories of holidays past provide continuity to all our lives. As we at WOR send our best wishes to the WOR radio family, we're joined by Tony Condemi and the Condemi Motor Company in Lodi, New Jersey, in sending you with holiday greetings. Tony has a business slogan, and it goes, "Where quality begins and service never ends," and Tony lives by that slogan. At Condemi Motor Company, you get selection, savings, and satisfaction. As a longtime WOR advertiser, the Condemi Motor Company joins us in wishing all of you a Merry Christmas and continued happiness and prosperity in the new year. Tony looks forward to serving you and your automotive needs in 1997. So from the Condemi Motor Company, happy holidays and a joyous new year. Now, something special for those of you that really love Barry and remember in years past. This is Barry from his first time through on WOR. It's 1947, Barry Gray on Broadway. Notice the pitch of Barry's voice, faster speech pattern, but unmistakably the great Barry Gray.
And here he is, the man you won't want to miss, the hero and the villain of the Barry Gray Show and a new entertainment, with such guests as Von Monroe, Olson and Johnson, and some resentful people of Teplitsky of Notre Dame. Meet the blaster of ceremonies, the pest of the guest, that rough old smoothie, Barry Gray on Broadway.
Thank you, Ken Powell, and good evening, everyone. This is a new show called Barry Gray on Broadway, an audition type thing, and seated across the desk from me I have Walter Gross, eminent pianist who has never appeared in Carnegie Hall. Walter and I are going to discuss such things as plays on Broadway. We're going to talk a bit about the music business as regards piano players, 88 ticklers, and then we're going to talk a bit about the music business USA 1947. And here he is, Walter Gross.
Good evening, Barry.
I don't think that plays with messages are particularly successful when they make the message the uppermost thing.
Well,
I think people shy away from messages in the theater. They go to be entertained. They don't go to be taught anything.
Barry, you hit on the biggest point in playwriting just then.
As it was so greatly expressed once by someone somewhere, he said, the only messages I want are from Western Union, and they only cost a quarter. I don't have to spend $4.40 to get them. You know, Walter, there are thousands of plays waiting on shelves written by young, aspiring playwrights that are truly great plays, and you can't produce them because no one will put money into them. But it's a well-known fact that if you come along with a show that has nothing but a very flimsy plot, maybe about a sailor chasing a girl in the park, and you have an opportunity for a 32-piece band to strike up a few bars of a tune that might make some money.
I like that. Anything that employs musicians, I'm for.
And someone that chases somebody through the park scantily clad, you immediately find a ready market for it, both from the backers and from the public, because it's proven that people like to see girls with practically no clothes on.
Well, what you have to say as your opinion is just about like this. You said about girls with no clothes on? Well, let's be careful. This is earlier in the evening than you're usually on, you know? And we get a slightly different type of
I
audience.
think we'll change that. It's earlier in the evening than you are usually on.
That's true.
We have met before.
Now we're going to say hi to somebody we all know here, WOR Radio 710 Program Director David Bernstein. David, did you ever think you'd end up as Barry Gray's boss?
I can't believe that. No, I never did, to be honest with you. I was one of those kids who found the rock and roll station, and all of a sudden came to 11 o'clock at night, and lo and behold, the rock and roll was gone, and I started to panic until I heard that this guy, Barry Gray, whoever he is talking about some pretty interesting stuff, and he's doing it in a style that I had never heard before, and it started to blow my mind. I became a fan of this guy on the radio, and all the guys that I was a fan of were guys who played music. So all of a sudden, it was Barry Gray came into my life, and he was there up until this week in life, and he will be with me forever.
You know, David, I think you echo the sentiments of so many people listening, and he really will be with people forever. To have heard him once was to know him and to love him forever. He really was like a part of my home.
He was a part of all of our homes, and he still is, because of what he gave to the industry. He gave a style that nobody has been able to imitate, and yet everybody understands, everybody listens to, and everybody tries to emulate. That's quite a position in society to have. I don't think he realized how important a man he really was.
David, when you first met him in person, did you feel his star quality immediately?
Oh yeah. You just looked up to this guy. He's about close to a foot taller than me, and I just looked up at this great man. I just looked up at him, and he had this smile that had a wink in his eye, as if we had been old friends. We had never met before, and I realized that there's a bond that's forming as we speak. First conversation with him, and this bond was forming, and it culminated on this past Monday. The day after I got a call from his wife, Nancy called me and said, if you'd like to come see Barry in the hospital, you have really one last chance. And I went to the hospital on Monday, spent 20 minutes alone in the room with him. Barry was comatose, and at the same time, I found myself sitting next to him and whispering things in his ear that I'm surprised I was willing to share, and I was. And at one point, Jay, Barry opened up his eyes, and his body started stirring. I had said something that meant a lot to me, and it was a very private thought. And I shared it with Barry, and he opened up his eyes. I know he heard what I said. Well, let me make one quick suggestion to anybody who's listening, because I was there. Be tuned in at 7:50 tonight, because I know we're going to play the tape that I was fortunate enough to receive today of Barry Gray accepting the 1996 Talk Show Host of the Year Award.
We have that.
Yes, you have it, and we'll air it at 7:50 tonight.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jay.
Glad to speak to you tonight. That was WOR's Program Director David Bernstein. Now we go to Gary Ackerman, Congressman Gary Ackerman of Queens. Hello, Gary.
Jay, how are you?
Well, we're doing well, but it is a kind of a solemn occasion tonight. I mean, I've heard you on so many times with Barry.
Well, I'll tell you, we've all lost a friend, and I think that there are millions of people, especially all of New York, that's mourning right now for the loss of an absolute legendary pioneer of an industry.
A real institution.
Everybody has these when I was a kid stories, but I really do. I was never very athletic, and all of my friends, for some reason, were all athletic. And I'd have this small transistor radio that I'd take down to the park when the kids were playing ball, and I'd be on the sidelines. And while everybody was running around and doing their thing, I'd have the radio up to my ear. And I had a friend full-time for the whole duration, and I learned so much from Barry as just about everybody who ever listened to him has. He made the radio useful. The radio was around for a long time before Barry. But when you think about it, people wouldn't say, I'm going to go home and listen to the radio. They were going to go home and listen to Barry Gray.
There was no voice that ever came through the radio that made me feel as comfortable and as secure as Barry Gray.
There was. You're absolutely right, Jay. There was a kind of a warmth there, and he could be tough, and he asked all the right questions. And some of these guys know a little bit about everything. He knew a lot about everything. And
he knew everyone.
And he knew everyone.
There wasn't one person from politics or show business that man didn't know and know well, and there wasn't one that didn't respect him.
That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And people would give their eye teeth to be on with Barry.
Very few people in radio can bow out leaving that kind of reputation, that kind of legacy intact over such a long and prosperous and successful career. Thank you, Congressman Gary Ackerman. Now we visit Clark Logan for the traffic.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Westchester County westbound at the Cross County Parkway. Still working on an accident there at the Springbrook Parkway. Blocks the right lane going into Rockland County northbound on the New York State Thruway. Another accident reported just south of exit 15. You'll find that in Suffern. Also, Bergen County, the shopping volume northbound Route 17 is heavy from Fairview Avenue and Rochelle Park into Ridgewood Avenue. Southbound Slow Century Road into Essex Street in Maywood. Lots of volume westbound Route 4 bumper to bumper from Broad Avenue into Hackensack Avenue. This report's a service of Fortunoff. If you're looking for a great price on great jewelry, well, Fortunoff's everyday low prices are lower than other stores' so-called 50% off sales. Guaranteed. Fortunoff, source of fine jewelry. And that's WOR Traffic.
I don't know about you, but the holiday presents I like to give are invariably the same presents I like to receive. One of my favorites is the gift of dry sack. This time of year especially, dry sack on the rocks with a twist is my ideal cocktail. You see, dry sack is not as warm as my regular drink, and yet has a lot more character than another glass of wine. So you guessed it. This year I'll be giving dry sack to the guys at the office. And it's dry sack for our next door neighbor. And my dad, he loves the rich, mellow taste of dry sack. Dry sack in its festive red holiday sack. A distinctive gift with a unique flavor. If your regular cocktail is a bit much this holiday season, give dry sack a try. Better yet, give someone the gift of dry sack. Imported from Spain by William Grant & Sons, New York, New York.
The New Jersey Division of Highway Traffic Safety presents Highway Safety Trivia. This month's topic is drunk driving. Are you ready? Listen carefully. How much money will it cost you if you're convicted of drunk driving in New Jersey? Your first offense will cost you A, $1,000, B, $2,000, or C, over $3,500. Time's up. If you guessed C, over $3,500 for the first DWI offense, you were right. You'll also lose your license, face possible imprisonment, and you must attend intoxicated driver classes. But that's not the worst part. You could kill or seriously injure yourself and others. And now some safety tips. If you're going to drink, don't drive. Stay where you are, call a cab, or have someone who hasn't been drinking drive you home. Always wear your seatbelt. It's your best defense against a drunk driver. Highway Safety Trivia is sponsored by the New Jersey Division of Highway Traffic Safety, the New Jersey Broadcasters Association, and this station.
WOR Radio 710, America's talk and information station, informs you about WOR contest rules. You must be 18 years or older. No purchase necessary. Prizes have no exchange value. Winners are responsible for taxes and agree to sign WOR documentation. Only one winner per household every 30 days. For complete rules for specific WOR contests, send a stamped self-addressed envelope to WOR Contest Rules, 1440 Broadway, New York, New York, 10018. WOR presents a tribute to Barry Gray.
So many of Barry's friends and colleagues over the years loved and respected him to such an extent that we're hard-pressed to fit them all in tonight, but now we'll hear from Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messinger.
This is Ruth Messinger. manager, the Manhattan Borough president. I was absolutely stunned this weekend to read of Barry Gray's death. I think for everyone who has ever been on the program or knew Barry or had a chance to talk with Barry, and probably for everybody who ever listened to Barry, it was like losing a friend. Barry Gray was a brilliant master of the art of radio hosts. He just knew what to do to put people at ease. He knew exactly when to support a visitor and when to attack a visitor. He knew when to encourage a questioner, and with an inimitable style, he knew when to hang up on a questioner. He must have been sort of like a juggler, because he managed to keep several people's conversations in the air, several strands of conversation running through the program, and he knew so much, and he so much enjoyed people that he could do it all with great good grace. I consider myself privileged to have been Barry's guest many, many times. But I think every time I was his guest, it was really very much like sitting in his living room. He would open the conversation. He would make me and all callers feel relaxed. He would orchestrate the conversation. Never did we simply talk about one issue, because Barry Gray knew everything about life in New York and had a phenomenal and ferocious memory and a great passion for this city. And so he would always move from topic to topic and talk about other issues and try to draw me out and try to encourage guests to be inquisitive and provocative, but never impolite. There just are not very many radio talk show hosts who are still doing programming, who have the elan and the verve and the passion for people that Barry Gray had. And I personally will miss him very much. You know, somehow I'll always be waiting for him to call again.
Thank you, Ruth Messenger. This is Jay Diamond on WOR, and now WOR's Ken and Daria Dolan.
Daria, I will never forget meeting Barry Gray for the first time in 1986. Remember we used to a little gruff, and, you know, boy, did we find out differently in the years since then.
Well, you know, but it was more interesting than that, because 1986, we were all working at the old WMCA together.
Yeah.
And the Strauss family still owned it at the time. And that was my first time on big-time radio.
Sure, of course.
And the show that finished just in front of us was the Barry Gray Show.
He was quite a character. We used to go in as we do now with Dr. Schwartz. Remember, Daria, we used to do a handoff just before the end of the show, and Barry was always yelling and screaming about something.
Well, and that was my first day on my first big job in radio. I was the one chosen to go in and do the handoff.
Yeah, that's right.
I have never been so frightened in my entire life. And I never told Barry how scared I was, but it took me about 3 or 4 months before I got over the shock and fear of having to deal with Barry Gray.
Well, I'll tell you, though, the 11 years since then, Daria, we have found him to be a very generous, a very warm fellow. He always had a joke, some of which we could repeat on the air, many of which we could not.
But that was the thing I think I remember most about Barry. Barry never, ever said hello without following it up with a punchline.
Hey, Dolans, have you heard this one? Oh, my, here we go again. Remember we had a wonderful dinner at his home one night, Daria?
Yes.
How wonderful it was with Nancy.
It was super. It was right after they were first married.
You know.
And he was just so proud of her.
He really was. Well, it's no secret that Barry certainly isn't a young guy. He is the standard of talk radio. He really invented talk radio going back into the 50s and maybe even the 40s. Remember the broadcast from Chandler's, Daria? And
in fact, we were out for dinner with some people the other night.
Yeah.
And they're older than we are, and they were married, I think, didn't they say the late 50s or the mid-50s or something?
Mid-50s, yeah.
And they used to date and go to Chandler's just to watch Barry Gray broadcast.
Barry Gray from Ken and Daria, we miss you. Thanks to you and others like you, but probably more to you than anybody else, helped birth talk radio as we know it. We owe you a lot professionally, we owe you a lot personally, and we surely miss you.
And I'll tell you one thing, Barry. I know you're up there broadcasting from Chandler's in the sky. God bless you. Rest in peace, Barry.
Thank you, Ken and Daria Dolan. We're on WOR, and now we say hello to an old friend of Barry Gray, Paul Colford, who for many years wrote Newsday's radio column. And Paul, you also filled in for Barry Gray a number of times.
That's right. I was in the curious position of one who had been on one side of the desk interviewing Barry for Newsday any number of times in connection with the radio column. And for a variety of unexpected reasons, found myself pinch hitting for him a number of nights in the summer of 1995 when he was sidelined with what I recall to be a hip injury. So all of a sudden, the guy whom I had listened to and interviewed was now the guy listening to me. It was a very curious position to be in, but I developed a fondness for him that I certainly carry to this day. He was supportive of me at the time. He was certainly the class of classy people in the radio business. I think, Jay, one thing that your guests thus far are getting at, and I think it can't be overemphasized, is the fact that Barry never really phoned it in. I use it as a term of phrase. You may remember a couple years ago, the old Spy magazine had an issue on coasting, and they accused all kinds of public figures and actors and singers and so forth of coasting on reputations that were made years and years prior, and they hadn't done anything fresh, new, or different to really. Talking with Marilyn Cutler, who was Barry's producer so faithfully in recent years, and she would talk about how, the guest lineup, for example, would be set in stone, or so she thought, and at the last minute, Barry would decide for whatever journalistic reason that they should do it entirely differently, and back they were to the drawing board. So he was never content to just let it be. He was always looking for a way to keep it fresh, keep it interesting, keep it different.
And Paul, this might be visionary, but I think it bears saying. Paul, when ball players talk about salaries of the past, they talk about, what would DiMaggio have gotten today? What kind of a salary would Mickey Mantle command? My God, these guys would get $30 million a year. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I think if Barry had been born 30 years later, he would have eclipsed Limbaugh and Stern put together.
Yeah, it was interesting that Barry, for his longevity, certainly outside of New York, probably didn't retain the kind of name recognition that a Rush Limbaugh or many others today have earned. But he seemed almost indifferent to that.
Well, no, but
he was so caught up, as I say, in doing the show tonight.
There were no satellites then.
Right.
You see, if he had been born 30 years later, he would have had 1,500 stations.
Yeah.
So it's something to think about. Paul, thank you very much.
Nice to be with you, Jay. Thanks.
Good to speak to you. And folks, if you want to participate in this impromptu tribute to Barry Gray, the number is 212-391-2800, 212-391-2800. Who knows? Maybe Barry will even hear you. I believe right now we go to, John Gambling.
This is John Gambling, and it is always a difficult moment when we have to think of one of our friends, one of our colleagues has left us, and such the case with Barry Gray. He is certainly going to be missed. He worked for a very long time and was an associate of not only this John, but John A. and even John B. Gambling. A man had been in the broadcast industry for better than 50 years, earns a very special place. And I think if there is one thing that always impressed me about Barry Gray, and working opposite ends of the days generally, we didn't get to see each other a lot, but occasionally we would cross paths in the hall here at WOR. I was always impressed with the enthusiasm. Here was a man that for so many years went and did, pretty much the same thing, a talk show, year in and year out, never lost the enthusiasm for what he was doing. And he always had, when listening to him on the air, he always had, I think, an innate interest in other people. It didn't have to be a mayor, it didn't have to be a senator, it didn't have to be a newsmaker. Barry always was interested, even if it was just a listener to Barry Gray that was calling with a comment. It's really quite something when you can run into somebody that continues to show and respect those that he is talking with the way Barry Gray did. He will certainly be missed here at WOR, and for all of the Gamblings, I know that we extend our warmest sympathies to his wife Nancy and to the entire Gray family. He will be missed.
He sure will. He sure will, John. And this is Jay Diamond on WOR, our tribute, our homage to, our founder, really, in this business, Barry Gray. And now we'll hear from Dr. Joy Brown.
The first time I met Barry Gray, neither of us worked for WOR. I was in town to do a book tour, and we were using a studio at another radio station, and Barry Gray walked in the room. He was tall and elegant and angry.
which to a very large extent describes a lot about Barry Gray. He was not an easy man. He was very bright. He always looked fabulous, even when he was in a jogging suit. He always put a scarf or a handkerchief or something around his neck, so he looked both elegant and, for those of us who are in broadcasting, protect the pipes. But he's really the guy who started talk radio. A bunch of years later, when I ended up at WOR, he was really one of the first people I ran into once I was officially hired, because we both worked the night shift. And I went in to say hello to him, and he welcomed me aboard, and between yelling at his producer, and told me that it was great fun to work nights, and it was a great old station, and started reminiscing about the other stations he'd worked for all over the country. But he would actually listen to my program going home in the cab, and then he and Nancy would have dinner together and listen to my program. So every night he would kind of critique the night before, and he would tell me his favorite call and what he thought I did a particularly good job of. So he was very, very supportive, and really mentored me in a wonderful way when I started WOR. And then I got shifted to days, and he was kind of the proud papa that was both very proud of me and furious with me for deserting him, and made no bones about it, although he wasn't angry enough not to tell me the secret when he and Nancy were preparing to adopt Dora. And Barry got named Broadcaster of the Year, a Lifetime Achievement Award for the National Association of Radio Talk Show Hosts, and I was determined that I was going to go to Washington and watch him get that honor, because he's not, as I said before, the world's easiest man to deal with, but there was an integrity about Barry, and a strength about Barry, and an energy about Barry, who was obviously not a young man even when I knew him. And it was one of those moments that I will be grateful that I had the sense to put myself in the way of my whole life, because he was charming and wonderful, and he really gave me the history to the work that I do, as well as the other several hundred people who were there to honor him. And then this incredibly magical thing happened to me, and that I got a completely unexpected award as well. And he was on the dais beaming at me and threw his arms around me and said, "Good going, kid." And the fact that it was really his day and I got a little piece of it made it particularly special. So Barry was angry his whole life. He was angry at injustice. He was angry at the way things should be and weren't. He was angry, I think, because this business that he began went in a direction of which he did not always approve. But he was always angry without malice. There was never an attempt to hurt or harm someone. And when his anger did hurt sometimes, which it did to me occasionally, and he realized it, he would apologize. There was no malice in the man. There was no attempt to hurt. There was certainly an attempt to change, to make people better. I think in the last several years he was angry at his own body, which was not responding the way he wanted to, and it caused him literally great pain. But when I remember Barry, and I shall, will always remember the elegance, the strength, the energy, and the anger, because that's part of who Barry was, and certainly will continue to be in my head and my heart. But Barry, I'm going to miss you.
Thank you, Dr. Joy Brown. For those of you who do not know, the great Barry Gray succumbed 1 a.m. Saturday morning, and this is our homage to our friend, our teacher, and, our relative, Barry Gray, and certainly the father of this business. This is Jay Diamond on Radio 710 WOR, and right now we're hearing from many of Barry's friends and colleagues, and we have a good one here. Guy Molinari, the borough president of Staten Island. Hello, Guy.
Good evening, Jay.
Well, you were on with Barry so many times.
Yes, indeed.
So many times. How far did you go back with him?
Oh, God. I guess as long as I've been in the political world, and that's over 20 years. I can't remember the first time I appeared on his program, but I was stunned. I did not know that Barry was sick or that he passed away until late this afternoon. And I guess I'm still a little bit of shock, because he was just such a profound character. I mean, this was a man that was New York. He was a voice for those of us that sometimes felt we were in the minority and we had views that we wanted to express. And he gave us an opportunity frequently to give our side of the story. And sometimes those of us that call ourselves Republicans didn't have that opportunity frequently. Barry always extended it to us. And
not that Barry was a committed Republican.
Oh, no, heavens no. It was just that he was a fair journalist, and he wanted to have both sides covered fairly, and he always did. And I guess that's why I respected him so much. It's just a terrible loss for everybody, but especially for New Yorkers. It's a voice that was a strong voice, a voice that everybody heard, and most people listened to him, and it's sad to know that that voice is quiet now.
Well, it's the passing of an age.
You bet.
It really is.
Yep.
It's a tectonic plate just shifting off. It's difficult it's difficult to express the impact this man had on 2 generations of not only political life but cultural life in our city.
Very good point. Very good point. And it's difficult to express in words really what we all felt about Barry. He was just an extraordinary person, and I think he set a standard for just about everybody, whether we're talking about radio or those of us in elective life. He taught fairness, he preached fairness, he practiced fairness, and he expected fairness from everybody, and he gave it.
You know, a lot of you guys who run for office are lucky Barry never decided to run against you guys. You know that? Wouldn't he have been a formidable opponent?
Oh, my God, yes, he would have. I sure as heck am happy he never chose to run against me, because that would have been difficult. He had a big following, and fine man, just a fine man. It was just such a terrible loss. And, well, I say this, Jay, I pay tribute to you and the others who are taking time out tonight to talk about Barry and what he was all about. I think it's a marvelous thing, and I think we owe it to the man, and I'm certainly delighted to, not delighted, but be able to have the opportunity to share with the listeners the tremendous loss I feel.
Thank you, Guy. I really appreciate it. Borough President of Staten Island, Guy Molinari, and now I think we have a legendary Barry Gray guest. Do we have the ambassador? Are we ready? You know, Ambassador, I've never met you, I've never spoken to you, but I can't call you anything else than Bill, from having heard you with Barry all through the years. It was Bill, so forgive me, Bill.
No, that's what it is, and that's what it was for 40 years with Barry. Actually, we went back literally 40 years. It began with the Hungarian Revolution, and although I see the newspapers have Barry identified primarily at that restaurant at 46th Street in Manhattan, I remember him in Brooklyn, and he had a radio show from there, and I had been with General Donovan and the International Rescue Committee during the Hungarian Revolution, and when we came back, Barry was, very passionate about it, very passionate about helping the freedom fighters, and so I was invited to go on his program, and that began a relationship that literally has lasted 40 years, and which has given me the enormous pleasure and honor of being with him for hours and hours and hours on this program.
Many of which I enjoyed and benefited from. I learned from the two of you talking to each other. So you were in the studio with him that first night in '56.
Yes. Well, as I recall it, it was one of those great restaurants in Brooklyn, and there was a piano playing. He had a lot of entertainers who came by. It was really in the restaurant itself. And then on 46th Street, I think it was also directly in the restaurant, because I remember a number of entertainers coming by then. Then, in I suppose, the last 30 years, it was in the studios.
So it had started in a restaurant?
Started in a restaurant. Well, certainly by the time the 1964 campaign...
That was in the studio?
That was in the studio, and that was with Robert Kennedy, and Barry played an incredibly interesting and important role in that campaign.
What did he do?
Well, it was Robert Kennedy running against the incumbent Senator Kenneth Keating, and it was a very tough and confrontational race. And Robert Kennedy had just been overwhelmed by crowds that no one had ever seen before in terms of political campaigns in New York, wherever he went. But part of that problem was that it cost him the ability to give his message. So by the time the beginning of October '64 came around, the race was very close. And Keating, sensing his possible advantage, challenged Kennedy to a debate. Well, Kennedy was prepared to do that, but then Keating, instead of that, said no, that he was going to... Kennedy thought that it would be a mistake tactically to go in at that particular time. So Keating rented the studio at CBS and had a half-hour program that he was invited Kennedy to attend. Kennedy then bought the next half hour of time on CBS and invited Keating to attend. But when the Keating program began, Bobby showed up at the door of the television studios and demanded entrance into the Keating program. And Barry had been chosen as the person who's going to be the interlocutor for the Kennedy half hour. And so Barry was there, and then Bobby went on his program with Barry because Keating hadn't allowed him in. And it was a spectacular night of political fire in New York. And then after that, the only debate between the two took place on Barry's radio program.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember my father listening, that incredible as it seems, and I was a kid, but I do remember that show. Ambassador William Vanden Heuvel, thank you, and hopefully it'll be my privilege to talk to you on and off the radio very, very soon. Let's take some calls now, quickly. 212-391-2800, in tribute to our friend Barry Gray. And Louise is on the Upper West Side. Hello, Louise.
I certainly am, Mr. Diamond, and it is always a pleasure to hear you and to talk to you. But when you said that, there was no satellite and he was not known outside of New York, I'm a kid from Buffalo.
No, dear, no. That's not what I meant.
No.
If there had been a satellite then, Barry's fame would have eclipsed and success would have eclipsed Linda and Stern put together. But there was no satellite then.
But guess what?
Yeah.
There was a very powerful radio signal, and there were a lot of us out there in the dark.
Right.
Listening to what was going on in New York because we wanted to know. And Barry Gray was the roadmap. He was the tour guide. He was, as Mr. Vanden Heuvel said, the interlocutor for the debate. But he was the one who was showing us everything out there in this town to those of us who were all out there other places. And when I
bet you he brought a lot of people to New York on the basis of that voice and that charm and that wit. Thank you, Louise. I appreciate it. Ted is in Manhattan. Forgive me for moving along. We want to fit some people in. Hello, Ted.
Hello. I grew up listening to my mother listening to Barry Gray, and then I had the wonderful, wonderful opportunity for basically 2 decades to work with him at WMCA, and one of my biggest thrills was to actually be on the air with Barry. My heart was pounding, etc., but Barry was a really, really an inspired broadcaster, and he had more charisma than anyone else I've ever known. And rest in peace, Barry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ted. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who haven't gotten on this hour, take heart. We will come back after the 7 o'clock news, and we're going to do yet another hour in honor of our friend, our companion, our favorite broadcaster, Barry Gray, somebody everybody respects. There is that music, and it's sad because right after that music sounds, we're accustomed to hearing Barry Gray. And as I said to Bob Grant a couple of weeks ago, you might not have been interested in the specific subject, but you wanted that man in your home night after night after night after night. That was his magic. That was his grace. That's what made this man not just a radio broadcaster. That's what made Barry Gray an enduring presence, an enduring star. Very, very few people have that, ladies and gentlemen. Believe me, I know. Barry Gray was and remains unique. He had a magic, a gift. It's called stardom. And right now, a very special guest, Nancy Gray, Mrs. Barry Gray. Hello, Nancy.
Hi, Jay. I really just called to thank you for all of this. I didn't expect to be on the air at all, but I'm just so grateful to you and Marilyn and David and everybody who's put this together, because Barry was so proud of what he did, and we miss him so much, and I'm just very, very grateful.
How is the lovely Dora? Because she was the pride and joy of Barry in the last couple of years.
She is just wonderful. She had a really incredible visit with Barry at the hospital. I was so happy that she could see him at the hospital. She's about 27 months now, and I told her a little bit about what to expect, and she said, I'm going to give Dada Tylenol and kiss his boo-boo.
Oh, my God.
They had a wonderful, wonderful visit about a week ago.
Well, Nancy, so many people, listeners, are trying to call through. We don't have time to put too many of them on the air tonight, but we'll try to take some more calls. But I think during the week on some of the other programs as well, and on a lot of the local hours here on Radio 710 WOR, we are going to hear from people and their outpouring of love for Barry, and their love really for that little girl that you had together, Dora. And I I know from having listened to him, and I'm going to tell you something. I was on, Nancy, I was on another radio station later at night, and in getting ready to go to the office every night, what do you think I did? I listened to Barry Gray, so help me. And I'm going to tell you something. I pilfered a couple of guests from Barry because of the riveting programs that I heard him do while I was getting dressed. I had it on in my room, and I had it on when I was shaving or brushing my teeth. Getting ready, I listened to Barry Gray every night as I had for years and years and years, going back to my home with my parents. And I can tell you that I will feel the loss in myself. And you want to know something? Sitting there the last couple of weeks and doing Barry's show, I said on the radio, and I said it to people around here, I miss listening to Barry.
I know it.
That enormous, titanic, magnificent presence and voice was something that was my companion at home alone in my apartment.
It's true, and I think, sometimes when he'd come home from work, and I listened to the show just about every night, he'd say, is it funny listening to me on the air, meaning listening to your husband on the air? And I said, no, it's not, because I'm listening to Barry Gray. It was as if, he is bigger than life, and he was a presence that...
A star.
I don't think he considered himself one, but he...
The biggest.
But I did.
The biggest.
I did.
Biggest.
And Jay, what you touched on in some of the other people that is so meaningful to me is the fact that he did do every broadcast as if it was the first. And that was very, very important to him. He
worked hard. Right. Nancy, please stay with me. We have Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Stay there. Mr. Mayor?
Hello, Jay. How are you?
Good, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
Nancy?
Hi, how are you, Rudy?
I want to express to you, the sympathy and the condolences and the prayers of everybody in the city. Barry was a great, great New Yorker, one of the very best.
Thank you, and your letter to him in the hospital meant so much to him. He was very, very proud of that, and let everybody know.
Well, I was listening to the show a little bit before I called in, and very much like Jay, I used to listen to Barry all the time, going back to the 50s and the 60s. I remember his interviews. Probably a lot of my knowledge and interest in politics comes from listening to Barry, so he was a real hero.
Thank you so much.
Well, I think, Mr. Mayor, one thing we can really agree on is that Barry's show was a really open format where issues could be debated, and he provided the kind of ambiance that made people comfortable speaking, and comfortable speaking to people that opposed them.
There's no question about it. No matter what issue it was, whether he agreed with you or disagreed with you, he gave you a fair chance. And he always had so much common sense. I mean, you could really get an awful lot out of listening to him.
Yeah, whether it was politics, art, culture, economics, or history, Barry made a commitment to doing that program every night. I really think you could tell, and maybe you'll agree, coming from the legal world, your training is as an attorney, I think you will agree that Barry cultivated an environment where opposing ideas could be aired comfortably. And I think it's important when people feel comfortable if they want to really open their hearts.
There's absolutely no question about it. And he helped to uplift the city, educate people in the city. I remember way back when, I remember the congressional race between Mike Seymour and then Ed Koch when he ran the first time for Congress. And it was on Barry's show that they did their debate. And it was one of my early involvement in New York politics, listening to those debates. It was just absolutely terrific, and he gave both of them a real chance.
Nancy?
Yes.
Nancy, in watching Barry prepare for the program, what made an impression on you? Did he work strenuously at home?
I think that what made an impression on me was, first of all, he was a speed reader. I'd ask him to read an article. He'd look at it for 30 seconds and I'd say, no, read it. He said, I did. Ask me anything about the article. And the other thing was that he was always working, but it was such a joy for him that it wasn't work. He would be listening to other radio shows. He would be watching the TV news. He would read 4 or 5 newspapers every day. He'd read every major periodical. And he was, as he put it, an information junkie or an information maven. He loved what he did so much that every minute was working, but it wasn't.
Mr. Mayor, are you there?
I'm right here.
Mr. Mayor, in listening to what Nancy said, would you say that if all, and then I'm not going to put you on the spot, But in listening to Barry, I cannot encounter him the way somebody running for office or would encounter him. But in terms of your own campaigns, in terms of issues that you've discussed with him, and let's face it, you've been on the air with me, you've been on the air with Bob, you've been on the air with many people. I seem to feel that you, as well as many other people in political life, opened up a bit more to Barry.
I think Barry set the standard for your profession, for your business. And I think all of you sort of learned a lot from him. And the fact is, I learned a lot from him. And there's no question, when he interviewed you, he would somehow get more out of you.
Yeah.
He also was just a wonderful man. And I have to say, he was also a very good friend.
Well,
a really good friend.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your coming to the microphone.
I miss him a lot. Nancy, I really miss him a lot.
Thank you so much.
And the whole city does. And I just think it's wonderful because I think he set the standard for this whole new avenue of debate, discussion, and when it's done right, it really advances our democracy.
Okay. Thank you, Rudolph Giuliani, Mayor of New York. Appreciate your coming tonight. Nancy?
Yes. Let me get off the air, Jay.
No. Before you go, I want to thank you for being here. But I want to ask, I don't know if this is, when did you first meet Barry?
We met in 1983. We met through mutual friends who asked that he had recently separated from his wife, and these friends said, why don't you call him up and ask him out for a drink? And I said, no. I had grown up listening to Barry, too.
Yeah.
I said, I'm sure what this man needs right now is some strange woman calling him up and saying, hey, let's go out for a drink. And they would not get off my back about this. Our friends Rin and Barbara. And finally I thought, well, I'll just call him. He'll say no, and that'll be that. So I called him up, and he said yes. And that was in 1983. We met at the Ginger Man and had drinks. And unbeknownst to him, I knew he had opening night tickets to American Ballet Theater. And my friends had leaked that information to me. So he, after the drink, said, would you like to have some dinner? And I said, oh, that would be lovely. And he then said that was the most ridiculous question I ever asked of me, because I'm definitely a good eater. And then later on in the dinner, he said, would you like to go to the American Ballet Theater? And I said, would I like to go to the American Ballet Theater? So we proceeded across the street to Lincoln Center. We had seats on the aisle, center aisle, about 10 rows back. And we sat down, and I said, is this the best you can do? And that was it. We fell in love, I think, that moment.
It was clear to anybody who listened how devoted he was to you and your little girl.
Thank you.
And I'm honored that you came on the air with me tonight, and let's hear more from you as well.
I thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you, Nancy.
Again, I thank everybody at WOR, such good friends, and I think more than anything, the listeners were and are so important to all of us, and I thank them too.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks.
That's Nancy Gray, Mrs. Barry Gray, and I'm sure your prayers go to her and that lovely little baby Dora. This is Jay Diamond on Radio 710 WOR.
Christmas shopping doesn't have to be hard.
Now through December 24th, save on all electronics and computers at Sears Brand Central.
You can close your eyes and point at anything, and it'll be on sale.
All TVs, VCRs, camcorders, stereos, PCs, brands like Sony, RCA, and Packard Bell.
Actually, you don't have to close your eyes.
You get the point. All electronics and computers are on sale at Sears Brand Central, now through December 24th. Both excluded.
It happens almost every weekend this time of year. There's a game on TV. A neighbor, an old friend, a college roommate. Someone drops by the house to watch the action. It's a special kind of camaraderie and warmth that makes for great times and great lifelong friends. This is the ideal time for an easy cocktail. Something not as strong as our regular cocktail, yet something with more character than just another beer or a glass of wine. This is the perfect moment for dry sack on the rocks with a twist of lemon. Dry sack is an amber, mellow drink imported from Spain in its famous burlap bag. What better cocktail to offer old friends who have gathered around for good conversation and an exciting game? Dry sack on the rocks with a twist. Perfect for the game. Imported from Spain by William Grant & Sons, New York, New York.
Now you can dial a diamond and save half by calling Empire Diamond at 1-800-SAVE-HALF. If you're in the market for a solitaire, engagement, or anniversary ring, or an investment diamond, shop around. Get your best price, then dial a diamond at 1-800-SAVE-HACK. Empire will advise you on size, shapes, and values. They'll sell you diamonds directly from the source without a middleman's markup. These diamonds are guaranteed to be priced at half the retail price, and a diamond certification by the Gemological Institute of America will be faxed or mailed to you. For qualified buyers, your diamond will be sent to your home or office for a free 10-day, no-obligation inspection, and upon your satisfaction, you then pay for your purchase, and you get a 60-day money-back guarantee. Empire Diamond, located in the Empire State Building over half a century, guarantees to you the lowest priced diamonds, 10-day free inspection, and money-back guarantee. So save over half on your diamonds and call 1-800-SAVE-HALF. That's 1-800-SAVE-HALF.
Nowadays, my prescription plan costs the same everywhere. But at my Legend Pharmacy, the personal attention I get doesn't cost a thing.
I don't want to be treated like a number. At my Legend Pharmacy, they treat me like a human being.
When you get older, your prescriptions are more important than ever. At Legend, I understand that.
If you want to stand in line, go to a chain drugstore. If you want personal service from a pharmacist you know, go to Legend.
When my baby got sick, my Legend pharmacist called up to check on her. You know, at Legend, they own their pharmacy. No wonder they take such good care of you.
In a world of impersonal chain stores and mail-away prescription plans, nobody even knows you by name. But one pharmacy still treats you like your own family doctor. Legend. And our everyday low prices are hard to beat.
For the best for your family. Good for the Legend name.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jay Diamond on Radio 710 WOR. Our homage, our tribute, our thank you to our friend,